Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Antisha Dongratana. I am the Assistant Dean for Research and International Affairs at Bridi Panomyong International College. And it is my honor today to introduce our visiting scholar and welcome you all to the episode 1 of Visiting Scholar Talk for PBIC. And today we have Associate Professor Oliver Streiter here with us. He will be with us as visiting scholar until August, and he's from the National University of Kaohsiung. So today he'll be providing us with a very interesting talk titled Burial Grounds as Sources for Studies in Culture, History, Languages, and Cognition, Chinese Tombs in Thailand. And so we'll go straight into the talk today, and I'll hand over the floor to Associate Professor Oliver Streiter. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks to the whole team for making this possible. I'm going to give this talk about Chinese tombs in Thailand, and initially I thought I would give you a lot of facts about these tombs, but then slowly, while preparing the talk, I moved more into the direction of how do we in general try to understand these tombs, or how can we analyze or interpret the tombs. So I will give you less of saying it is like this, but more like how can we get to know this, or how do we understand these tombs. A little bit about me and my background. So I am currently at the National University of Kaohsiung. There at the Department of Western Languages and Literature. So we have languages, literature, and culture as main streams of our research. I'm the head of the Research Center for Asia-Pacific Languages and Culture, associated with the French Center of Research of Contemporary China. And now I have the honor to be the visiting scholar at PBIC at Thammasat University, and in this function I give this talk today. Who I am. So these are two photos. Since about 20 years, I do research mainly on tombs and tombstones, documenting them. Slowly moving also into the direction of documenting temples and other religious side, because there's a close connection, and one side would allow eventually to understand the other side. So, for example, we have names on tombstones, and at the same time we find names of people in temples in different contexts. But so in the tombstone, it's more family relations, and in the temple we have more social relations. We can get to know about how wealthy people are by looking at the inscription at temples. So gradually but usually it is we extended our research from mainly Taiwan to neighboring areas in Asia. So we went to Okinawa, Hong Kong, Macau, and then there was a reason also to come to Thailand. I will talk quickly about that. So we continue doing research on tombs and temples, and in a different context, in a slightly different way, and integrate all this research, and then eventually compare what we find in Thailand or Malaysia and Japan and Taiwan and China and Hong Kong, etc. So my background is mainly in psychology and linguistics. So this probably shows you I'm not so much interested in the tomb as such as a, let's say, as a building. I'm not an architect, something like that. Or I'm not so much interested to the bricks. So the question for me is, why do people do that? What do they think? What do they believe? What are their perceptions, etc.? How do they talk about it? So then I'm in the digital humanities. Welcome. The digital humanities is related to storing all the data we collect in a digital format so that we and maybe later on people can access these data and do analysis on them. So these data are usually, in our case, photos of tombs and temples, but also data we derive from these photos, like transcriptions. So if we have inscriptions, some writing in stone, we transcribe them. Think of a Word file, which or can be Googled, or descriptions saying, oh, a short text saying, oh, this is a nice temple located in the southeast or east of the village. And so this Takbong Tombstone project, which we started 20 years ago, this documentation of tombstones in first Taiwan and then East and Southeast Asia. I do a lot of field work, thousands of days of field work, and I designed the database. That is, these data have to be stored in a certain format. So we cannot just fill in Word files. Nobody would find any data in them. And finally, I do the archiving. That is, not personally, but I contact the people and I make sure that the data are archived in a way that they might be accessible in 20 or 50 or 100 years. And we might think or hope that in 100 years, these data are even more relevant than now, because most of the object we have documented might be gone or renovated, modified. We don't know what might happen. So quickly, so this is a tomb in Taiwan. Quickly, what we do, we go there, we take the camera, and then we take photos in a kind of standardized way from different positions. So you see first photo on the right side, then photo of the left side, then we take a photo of the tombstone, and there is the altar. There might be offerings or no. So these days I've been at Chiming, or I've been at the burial grounds in Bangkok, and of course many of these altars that had offerings brought there. Then we have an earth god. And this is something some graveyards in Thailand have in this form or another form. A jinlu, a kind of stove for burning paper money, and then whatever else we find, some decoration, etc. So then we carry these photos home, and then we do some kind of operation on these photos. On the left side, you see a kind of annotation. For example, we have a kind of interface, and then we can click on the buttons, and the buttons are connected to the database, and we can say, well, in front of this tombstone there was a flower or a candle or some incense, etc., and we would store this data in the database. Or on the right side, there's another interface for transcription. So you see the tombstone with a place name on the top to be read from right to left, and it's Tainan. And above that, you see the small field, so we can type, and we enter the inscription in the tombstone into this field. We write Tainan, and we give it a kind of label like log for location and saying this means the place name on the tombstone was Thailand. And then when we submit, the data will go into the database, and later on we can try to find all tombstones which have this place name or none or a Thai or whatever in the place name, or place names that refer to Taiwan or to China or to another place. So we do this since 2007. I said 20 years, 17 years now. More than 500,000 photos have been collected of more than 100,000 sites, where a site is a tomb, a temple, a house, a prayer site, and almost 1,500 days of field work. So one of the main questions we are interested in is the question of what does it mean to be Chinese? In Taiwan, we have the case that indigenous people slowly have Sinicized. They became Chinese. So that is an interesting process. How can you become Chinese if you're not Chinese? So the question, for example, can I ever become Chinese? In Thailand, we have another interesting case where people who are Chinese become less and less Chinese. So yesterday I talked to a person, and she told me she was Chinese in her childhood, but she is no longer Chinese. So when she was a child, they had some Chinese rituals like Chinese New Year or praying to some Chinese gods, but that no longer exist in their life, and so she no longer feels Chinese. So there is this way of you may be more or less Chinese, and you may become Chinese, and you may lose your Chineseness. So this is a main force. And so, for example, if you look at why are there 4,711 tombs in the United States, we documented all these are Chinese tombs. So the most of them in Hawaii, but some also in mainland America and in the Philippines and Malaysia, and so all these are kind of Chinese tombs. In Vietnam also, these are tombs of Chinese people. And maybe I now have to clarify before, maybe I say before. So whenever you have a question, you can interrupt me, right? I prefer to have a discussion than to talk for 2 hours without any feedback. So the question is, what does it mean when I say Chinese tombs? We have to clarify that. I don't say you are Chinese. How can I say that? By analyzing your blood, or by looking into your face, or look at your hair, or the color of your hairs? No. People themselves claim that they are Chinese. If you build a tomb in a Chinese graveyard, which has written on it, I'm a Chinese graveyard, and you build a tomb there, this kind of is a claim that you are Chinese. Or if you set up a tombstone and write in it in Chinese characters, this is also a claim that you're Chinese. Or if you write a place name on your tombstone and that place name refers to China, then also you claim you're Chinese. So whenever I say Chinese tombs or Chinese people, that is not that I say these are Chinese. I observe they say they are Chinese. So in Vietnam, in Thailand, Singapore, all these are Chinese tombs, people claiming that there are Chinese. And interesting, of course, is how they claim it and how convincing their claim is. So, now we get into more details, and I will only talk about a few tombs. And this is a kind of exercise I try to do. That is, in January this year, 2024, Ajahn Usani and Ajahn Thomas, we went together to the graveyard in Ceylon. And the first graveyard we went to, because the first we arrived was the Hakka graveyard. When you come from the BTS, that's the first you encounter. And there we went. And mainly Thomas took some photos, and I tried to use only the photos that Thomas took, just to show there's no magic, or I will do some magic with the many thousand photos I have taken and then try to convince you of something which you cannot see. We just use a few photos which Thomas at that time took. So on the left side, you see me and Ajahn Usani in front of a tombstone. And on the right side, we see the first very interesting tombstone. So what do we see? We see a tombstone which at the very top has, you might think something bizarre, but if you then look at it, it's a zhong. It's a big zhong, and zhong is the zhong of Zhongguo or China, right? So this is what I say. People claim that they are Chinese. I don't tell them you are Chinese. And under that, we have a red star with 5 corners. Usually, this red star with 5 corners is understood as a communist symbol. It has been used in, so let's see, I'm talking about this red star, right? We'll say that later on see all the or many communist or former communist countries or associations which use the red star. Here we have a first question. What does it mean that on the tombstone or on the tomb of this person there is a red star? So we can say this guy is a communist or claims to be a communist. Maybe we can agree on that. But furthermore, what does it mean? What does it mean to be a communist? So there are different kinds of communists, right? For example, Karl Marx was a communist, but very theoretical. Maybe I was a communist when I was 17. I mean, who was not a communist at the age of 17 or 18? Maybe all of us. But this was a kind of very hot-hearted communist. And then we have communists like Stalin or Lenin or Marx and all this. So what does it mean that this guy, this person has a star? We cannot claim this person supported or would have supported Stalin or Lenin or Mao or any other. So we have to look closer into what this would mean. Then just a short thing you might miss. So if you look at the background, then you see here a tomb which is round, and there's also something more round shaped. This, let's say, communist tomb is very avoids every round shape. We might say it is very rational, right? Even this column is has no round shape. There are these steps, etc. So it is getting away from this round thing, and this round thing usually is associated with feng shui, a good feng shui. So this kind of tries to be, first interpretation, more rational, more getting away from what we might think are Chinese traditions. Okay, that is the first impression. So what happened then? We were looking very intensively at this tombstone, talking about it and reading, and then we turned around, and then Thomas said, I know this photo. I said, wow, I do know this photo. He said, that is the shoemaker of the king. And I'm writing a paper on him, or I'm doing research on him. So, very interesting. Just opposite to the communist, there is the shoemaker of the king. King, communist, a kind of contradiction. And on top of this, we find this, which we find also on a number of other tombs on the Hakka graveyard, which is presumably the seal of the king. And presumably the king has two seals, name stamp, one in Thai and one in Chinese. So this kind of means that he provided the king with his shoes. So this is the entire tomb. We see the lions to the right and left. We see some duilian. We can count the characters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the numbers should be impair, odd. Odd is a good number. In Chinese, we see that there has been some candles been burned, a little bit careless, so the wax has flown all over and it's burned all over. So you see a kind of negligence. And you see me, probably I just directly started to talk about tombstones. And then we took photos. I find that very interesting. We had the feeling of having made an important discovery, and we took photos. Another thing to observe is that we all wear slippers because this area is frequently flooded for weeks and months. So actually, while walking, we always walked through water. The water was up till this level, right? And we walked through water and get to one tomb. And these are our footprints, right? So now we come a little bit closer to our interpretation of, yeah.
Do you have any record about that shoemaker? Did he choose the style of the tomb by himself when he was alive, or someone else?
I have no records of the shoemaker, so I know that Thomas is doing research on him. The question you raise is a very important question. That is, who makes the tomb, or who decides the tomb? Is it the person who is in the tomb, the deceased, who before plans everything? Sometimes, yes, it is the case. But also sometimes we just die without knowing, and then other people would do it for us. So this is a question I cannot answer. It would be interesting to answer, but we will slowly get into this question. So what happened here is that Thomas knew this person, the shoemaker. Here, that is my drawing of the shoemaker. You will get used to my drawings. And we have some information. So Thomas knew where is his working place and the road where he lives and so on. And we might look up more data on him in the internet. And then we can transfer this data onto the tombstone, or we can start to understand a little better the tombstone. So, for example, just looking at the tomb, we don't know that he is a shoemaker. Knowing this person, we know that he's a shoemaker and a shoemaker of a king, and now we know this is the tombstone of a shoemaker of a king. Very simple, very straightforward. On the other hand, there's also a transfer of knowledge from the tombstone to what we know about the person. So, for example, here we have the name of the shoemaker and the son and the grandson written in Chinese. So, I don't know whether Thomas is online, and I don't know whether he knows the names of the son and the grandson, but probably, I guess, he would not know the name of the son and the grandson in Chinese, because they probably use their Thai name in daily life, etc. So, I don't want to say it's very interesting, but eventually we can extract data from the tombstone, which we don't know, and enrich our knowledge about this person. And then it can go forward and back for some time, so we know more about the person, we understand a little bit better the tombstone. So, for example, once we know the Chinese name of the grandchildren of the shoemaker, we might wonder, why aren't there the names in Thai? So why, if the people in their daily life have a Thai name, why do they use a Chinese name on the tombstone? So this might go. As for our communist tomb, the situation is slightly different. So here nobody said, oh, I know this guy. So we just have the tombstone, and we know there is a person, and so from the tombstone we can slowly start to extract data and try to get to know who that person is. We might get a name, we might get some dates, maybe a place name, and then we can Google or look up who is who and get some information, and then the process might go again, between the different sources information, we enrich this image. So the tombstone might be a starting point for a research about a person we previously knew nothing about. And we probably also cannot Google. So we cannot Google, give me the name of an interesting person I know nothing about. Right? Google cannot give that to me. We'll see that. Yeah, I think 1946, we'll see that. 1946 or 47. So, okay. So, because the tombstone might be a starting point, and maybe the only starting point for research on a person, so we store, here I draw all the tombstones, and we store them on a CD, right? Here are 1, 2, 3 tombstones, kind of the digital images of the tombstones we put on a CD or in an archive, so that later on people might find these names, find these people, and then start to do research on them. So, coming back to this tomb of the communists, and for example, we want to know more about this zhong and about the star and the other inscription. The question, can a tomb inform about itself? Can a tomb tell us something? So like a book, or we read a book and then we understand the book. That is tricky, because we frequently believe to understand, but we don't know exactly what makes us to understand and all the reasons why we might be wrong. So, to give you this example, we have a tombstone, and for example, on the tombstone we have a cross. We might say, oh, he's a Christian. True, it might be. But this might be the direction. How do we do? So we, in our mind or in a book or so, we go through a number of possible symbols, and then we find the most similar one and say, oh, this and this is the same symbol, and then we see, oh, this is a cross, this is used by Christians on their tombs, and then we say, okay, this is a Christian tomb. But you see, this is not that we can read the tombstone on its own, but we compare the cross to lists or sets of symbols or dictionaries, etc., and look it up. It is only that we believe to know that the cross is a Christian, we think the tombstone tells on its own, but it cannot. In addition, and we come to that problem, if you look up, for example, the Unicode characters of a cross, then you might find maybe 20 different crosses, because different Christian groups might use different crosses to identify their subgroup. So, for example, the Orthodox Church, I don't know whether all, but some have a cross like this, which might also be more realistic. So Jesus was fixed here and the feet were kind of fixed here or were on this bar. And this is a cross we find, for example, in Thésée, which is a kind of religious group in France. So then the question is, an important question, if we find this cross, and in a row of 20 crosses we find this cross, does it mean this cross is the subgroup, or is it just kind of the most general, it just means Christian, or does it mean a Christian of this subgroup? And the following, it just shows you the same game goes on again and again. So if we see Peter, the name written on the tombstone, we might think, oh, that's a Christian name, and so, but how do we know? So because we have kind of in our mind a list of something like Muslim names, Ibrahim, Muhammad, Mustafa, etc., and we have a list of Christian names, Paul, Peter, Mary, and then we find the name Peter in the list of Christian names and therefore believe that this probably is a Christian person. But it's not that the tombstone informs on its own. This is what we have in our mind. So this is what we have in our mind, or in the form of books on our table or library, and this influences how we interpret the tombstone. The tombstone doesn't speak on its own. So, just to illustrate this fact, so the question, what does this red star actually mean? And you can look up the red star in Wikipedia and you find not only this, but you find a kind of 50 or 60 countries which in their history have been communist or claim to be communist or something like that. And the question is it meaningful now to try to find this star in this list? Therefore, the question you asked right now, when did he die, is an important question.
That option, I think, when was the tombstone used? When was the tombstone used?
I think in 1946 or not, for 1947. So this indicates that all this is not true. If the tombstone was built in 1947, all this was after 1947. So Communist China was proclaimed in 1949, so there was nothing like this. So then the question is, if this no, what is this? So what we have to look at to understand is a more local context. So we should not look up all the communists in all the world to understand this red star. There are two things we have to look at. One thing is we have to look at other tombs in the graveyard which also have the star. Well, this is no longer red, but maybe it has been red, and the same for here. And we would have some inscriptions like a time, and there's one more here. And there are other tombs which don't have a red star at the top, but which have other things at the top. So we have to compare the red star at the top to what other tombs have at the top. Let's go a step back. This is our first communist tomb, and it has no round shape. Then there is a second communist tomb, also no round shape, and the third one also no round shape. Kind of trying to be rational, maybe modern, etc. But then we get to this very interesting communist tomb. And the question really is, what does this communism mean? It has also these corners, so being rational, but you see that the tombstone is angled, so at about 45 degrees with respect to the tomb. So why that might be the case? So the Hakka graveyard provides, through the grid of the path of the roads on the graveyard, 4 basic directions, which is more or less now north, south, east, west. So there is no way to, or no easy way to have a tomb looking southwest or southeast, etc. But on the Hakka graveyard, we find quite a number of tombstones where the tombstone has another direction than the tomb. And the only explanation is that this is the best direction for the tombstone, or for even maybe in the tomb the coffin is in that direction, for feng shui reasons, but the tomb cannot be built in that direction because the lot or the concession area is just square, and beside the neighbor there's just this place. We find these angled tombstones also frequently in Hong Kong and Macau, so not so far away from the area where Hakka people are from. So apparently for these people, the right orientation of the tombstone is something very interesting. Why do I talk about this? Because we want to understand what this communism means. I said they have these bulky forms which want to be rational, but at the same time, the tombstone tries to get the best feng shui. So this reflects some very deep Chinese ideas about landscape and auspiciousness, etc., and at the same time tries to get away from it. So it's kind of inner conflict. Here we have whatever communism means. Here we have the seal of the king. king, communism, king, a kind of contradiction. I think there's no communist country with the king. No? Here we have fu, 变fu, 祝福, so wishing good luck, and that is actually the function of the tomb, that is to transmit or to bring luck and wealth to the offspring through the tomb. So the tomb collects the qi and the feng shui and then transmit it to the offspring. So also this fu is a kind of let's say very traditional Chinese conception of a tomb, and so to say, and now it comes, the only claim we can do at the moment is we can compare the red star to this king of the seal and to this, and the only thing we can say, this is in kind of opposition to this and to this. So this is not Stalin and Mao or Lenin or another Marx, or it is just saying, I probably don't like the king, or I don't like to be in a country with a king, and I try to get away from these kind of traditional Chinese ideas. But we see the conflict because the tombstone is angled just to get the best feng shui. And this then again raises the question which has been asked here, who actually builds the tombs? And why it is built. So I come back to the cross, or I could have replaced it by the star. So if we see a tomb with a cross and a star, is it because it is the conviction of these people? Or is it just because all the people around, all the tombstones around, they have a cross, so I say, okay, I also have a cross, that is maybe a safe way, right? Nobody will talk about me, and I will be just like the others. Or here, if we have a cross on the tombstone, what does it mean? Does it mean the person who is in the coffin was a Christian and wanted to have a cross? Or is it the family after the death which decides to put a cross on the tombstone? And here, forgive me my drawing, but this is the carver carving a cross. And maybe I can give this as a warning to you. If you accidentally die in Europe and you don't tell the carver, or nobody tells the carver that you don't want to have a cross, so you end up eventually with a tombstone with a cross on it, because that is the most natural thing to do for them. And it basically also maybe only means die or dead. Or is there a kind of powerful institution like a church or any other powerful institution which kind of through its power influences the choice and makes people have a cross? So the question is really, what does the cross tell us? Person, the family, the carver, the society, powerful institutions. So what we definitely should get away from is to see something on a tombstone, something like Peter here, and then we say, oh, I know what it means, and then we look up Peter in a list of names, and then we say, oh, this is that. Or we see a red star on tombstone, we look up a number of symbols and say, oh, that's a communist. And maybe it's a first step, but then we have to work much harder. So now it gets more difficult. What we have to understand, for example, if we see Peter on a tombstone, is the local meaning. So, and there are different axes. So one is time. So for example, we might divide the tombstones we find on a graveyard in 3 periods, but it could be more. And we have a number of names here, a number of names here and here. And the names here might be different and different. At the same time, we might look at different space. So in the Silam graveyard, Silam area, we have the Cantonese, the Hakka, and the Hokkien graveyard side by side. So we might compare what we find here to what we find there to what we find there. So this is probably what people have in their daily life, and this is probably what they know of. This is what has been in the past, and this is probably what they want to have in the future. At the same time, we have maybe more dimensions like religion. So also in Ceylon, we have beside the Hakka and Hokkien and Cantonese graveyard, we have a Christian graveyard, which is mainly a Chinese Christian graveyard. So all these have their own systems of writing time, writing dates, having names, mentioning place names, and we have to understand whatever it is, a time, a place, or a name in the local context and probably in contrast to what has been in the past, what is going on the other graveyards or in other communities or in other religions. So, this is not very sharp. So what I want to say here is that we look at the kind of semiotic systems. To understand, for example, Peter or the red star, we look at semiotic systems to understand the name or the date. But there are other systems like geographic or geological systems. So these are 2 maps. This is the area I've been walking in at the last days. So this is a very interesting kind of international area. So here we have a Vishnu temple, Indian. Here we have Wat Prok. Here we have the Chaozhou graveyard. And now I have to be very careful. And attached here, this area is the Islamic graveyard, and there you have a mosque. And then you come to St. Louis, which is this great Christian area. And then I go to the other map, and then St. Louis is here. And then we get to Ceylon, and then here we have the Christian and the Parsi graveyard. And then here we have the Hakka graveyard. And then here we have the Hokkien graveyard. Then this is not clear to me. Either this or either this has been the Hainan graveyard. And then here we have the Cantonese graveyard, and somewhere here we have the Cantonese school. So all this area is kind of, I don't know how to say it, foreign. So we went from Indian to Chaozhou, Muslim, Christian, Catholic, Protestant, Cantonese, Hokkien, Hakka. All this area, it is just one belt, one area, which is kind of now cut by different road, is dedicated or given to foreign communities for burials and for religious practices. And as I told you, especially the Hakka graveyard, the east side, and the Hokkien graveyard, the east side, but also the Chaozhou graveyard, the east side, frequently are underwater. Why do I say that? Because that is also something we need to be aware of in order to understand these tombs. So, what happened? So, I think this was Wednesday. Wednesday was Timing, right? Wednesday I was Timing, I went to the Chowder graveyard. And I went with a number of families, and this allowed me to connect different tombs. So I contacted the family and said, oh, can I go with you and take some photos? And they said, yes, of course. And we went to this tomb, and you see some candles, and they had the prayers. And we have a tombstone here, 223, and there we have Dao Gui Wang, so that is the male, and then we have two wives to the right and the left, and on the left side is Mrs. Fang, and on the right side is Mrs. Ma. Everything nice so far, and the family told me this is the grandfather. Okay, I said, okay, that's the grandfather. Then we went to another tomb, which is this one, which is 542. But the tombstone is exactly the same. It has also Dao Gui Wang as the grandfather, and on the left side it has Mrs. Fang, and on the right side it has Mrs. Ma. And of course, they had their ceremony and the prayers and so. And then I asked them, oh, what's going on? Can you read your tombstone? Of course, they said, no, we cannot read our tombstone. And we said, oh, this is the grandfather, the grandmother. And they told me the name of the grandmother in Chaozhou. And I could identify this Mrs. Fang as the grandmother. And he knew that there are 3 people on the tombstone, and he said, one grandmother is in China. So, interesting, we have 2 tombs with the same tombstone, with 3 names on them, and this is the tomb of the grandfather here, with the same date here, and this is the grandmother which is in this tomb, and this is the grandmother in China. So, and at the beginning I couldn't believe, I must say, because this kind of violates everything I would expect. But then walking again through the graveyard, and with some luck, I found more and more of these cases where we have tombstones, identical tombstones at different parts. And so my understanding would have been that if this is a family tomb, then people would bury a grandfather and grandmother together. Especially there are just 100 meters among them, it's the same direction, so there would be probably no fundamental problems of burying grandfather and grandmother together. But here we get to another context, and that is the geographic or geological context I'm talking about. This is, the area is wet. So in order to get 2 coffins into one tomb, you would get to have deeper into the ground. And this would mean you would put one coffin into kind of very wet soil, which is not good for feng shui, which is not good for the bones, etc. So therefore, on this graveyard, people probably don't follow what they would have done in Chaozhou, putting different people into one tomb, one family into one tomb, but they have a kind of copy of the tomb. It looks a little more like a copy, right? With exactly the same tombstone, and put them into different tombs. So just to show you that there are not only semiotic systems like the cross or the red star or dates, etc., we need to understand, but we also need a little bit to understand the ecological environment. So this leads us now to a more complicated image. So in general, we have to distinguish nomothetic questions from ideographic questions. Oh. Ideographic questions are questions which kind of are related to this. The question, for example, who is this person? Why does this apple fall? Why can this ant climb up a hill or a tree, etc.? It is about this. Monothetic questions are about all, the rules that govern this world. So, and the most famous nomothetic kind of say formula is that by Einstein, the energy is the mass times the speed of light square. Knowing that, you can explain most laws in physics. So this explains almost everything, or quite a lot. So this makes sense to a lot of things we find in our daily life, that the apple will fall, the heat of the sun, etc. And it guides our understanding. That is our heuristics. We have a way to look at things too. So, for example, if we look at the falling apple, we have a specific perception of this falling apple in terms of the laws of physics. We don't think, maybe you might think, oh, the poor apple, and now the whatever, now it's in pain. No. So the falling apple or the ant cannot prove that this is right. But as long as we make more discoveries and we find it interesting and fruitful, we continue to use this nomothetic model. So what I try to answer, the question I try to answer still is, how can we understand a tombstone, this tombstone? And what I want to say is we cannot understand this ant or this apple or this man or this tombstone just by looking at them. We have to understand much larger context, or much larger rules, which probably apply to all of them. And once we have done that, we can slowly trace back and try to understand this ant, this apple, this person, this tomb. Oh, there are two M, so one should be enough. So nomothetic systems. So these are maybe the most important and most famous. One is survival. So Darwin's idea of survival. So we all know about it, right? There are strong snakes and weak snakes, and the strong snakes they can catch the rat, and the weak snakes cannot, and therefore the strong snakes survive and the other don't survive. Relativity theory, that is Einstein, just quantum mechanics is opposition to relativity theory. It's about the very small things. And then there are the laws of thermodynamics. So maybe you remember from your chemistry class something like entropy, the word entropy or diffusion. And one, of course, is the heliocentric model, that the idea that the sun is the center of our universe, no, not our universe, our solar system, and that the Earth is orbiting around the sun. Which, by the way, is not true. It is just the most simple model. It is a convenient model. It's a good model. But there's no way to say that it's true. So these are kind of systems we use to understand this world. For example, yesterday there was a moon shadow going from Mexico through the United States to Canada, right? You all read about it in the news and me as well. So this can be easily predicted with the heliocentric model. And as long as we can make such predictions and they are true and we are excited, we continue to use this model. So again, 2 M's, 1 is enough. About cultures. So are there such very general laws of cultures which allow us to understand tombs and these tombs? And at this point, you can start to criticize me. Welcome to criticize me. So, and I put them, these systems in a hierarchy, and I would say the most important system for cultures is similar to what we have in biology, is survival. That is, a certain culture we encounter, no matter where we go, is there because it survived. So we say this culture is resilient. It has the capacity to survive. And much, or maybe everything of this culture is exactly about this survival. So I know that not everybody agrees on me, agrees on this with me, but it is always an interesting debate. So people usually agree on the importance of survival in the context of culture if we think of kind of indigenous people like living on an island and the storm is coming and they do something in the culture to prevent the storm from blowing away their stuff. And people would disagree and say, oh, cultures like the Thai culture, which is a very advanced culture, or American culture or French culture, they are about survival. So why would the French baguette be about survival? Or why would be the music of Bach, toccata and fugue, da 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 da, be about survival? This can be debated. You can agree or not agree, but I would say the idea of trying to understand why the French bread, the French baguette, helps with the survival of some people is an interesting way to approach that culture, and eventually we might understand a lot. We'll come back to it in more detail. A second very general law of culture is the reduction of entropy. Entropy is, you might understand as a mess, chaos. So culture is about avoiding chaos. So for example, if you look at the chairs in these rooms, there's one which is a little bit chaotic, but it is very organized, right? And it's very organized because this way it works. And frequently, it is not really the question how it is organized, it is the question that it is organized. So for example, if we look at survival, and we think of cars in Thailand and in Japan driving on the left side of the road, right? And in another country, France and the United States driving on the right side of the road, what is the survival? So probably there is no difference in survival. The important thing is that there is an organization. that that there is no entropy, that people are randomly driving on the right or left side. No. So it doesn't matter, many cases, whether you drive on the right side or on the left side. Important is that there is a rule and that there is a kind of organization. Also, the chairs or tables might have been set up in a different way, but imagine the chairs and the tables just in a very chaotic order would kind of interfere with our activities. So these limits of entropy I will explain by the limits of randomness, and then I will talk about systematic changes in time and space-time. So what I want to say is culture is ruled by these things, and we have to understand these very general mechanisms in order to understand this graveyard, this tomb. It is hard. So, space-time. There are not many ways that cultural features move through space and time. One is diffusion. So you have something like people singing a certain song or speaking a certain language in a certain area all over, and slowly you have kind of diffusion. So this feature goes into other directions. We have the phenomenon of migration. So people with a certain culture, certain features, certain activities, certain practices live in one area, and then for whatever reason they move into another area and they continue to have the same practices, which is surprising because they change their environment, the living conditions, and why do they stick to the same practices? In addition, we'll come to the next. It might be even kind of worse, nostalgia. That is, people maybe moved from this area and it was, let's say, mildly messy, and they move to this area and they get a more organized. So that is, it is not that they bring these features to there, but they're here and then they're kind of through their memory reconstruct these features and are more systematic than the people here. So, for example, I'm German living in Taiwan, and the Germans in Taiwan are more German than the Germans in Germany. And there's also a kind of saying in Taiwan about the Taiwanese themselves. They say to each other, "Oh, you're more Chinese than the Chinese are." So kind of once you move out of a certain area and you have a certain number of pressures, you try to preserve things more, you're more rigid, you try to avoid other influences more systematically, and you systematize your culture more than it has been where you came from. And then there is a top-down propagation, that is, you have features popping up in a random space, but at the same time. This means usually that it is a top-down power, something like politics or media or the state or law, etc., which makes that people in different places at the same time start to show some behavior. So, for example, I don't know when it was in Thailand when you had to have the belt in the car, right? These are the kind of, you have the new law, and then suddenly people start to behave in according to this law. So these are basically the way how features, cultural features, spread through space. How do they spread to time? It seems very trivial, but it's not. So every cultural feature, and this is we have to understand, has a beginning and has an end. Maybe we don't know the end yet. So, for example, people in Thailand drinking tea. That is a culture feature. And they still drink tea, right? So maybe we are somewhere here. So we don't know about the end. But what I say is, in order to understand drinking tea, we cannot just look at what people do here. We have to go back and try to find the origin. What is at the origin of drinking tea and what made it popular and which movement or phases there have been. And there are these different forces. So let's return to Peter and say, oh, there is a certain amount of people which have the name Peter. It could be anything. It could be drinking tea or having a certain kind of cap. So there is the force plus Peter. So motivation to have the name Peter. And there is the motivation to have another name. And of course, if Peter is increasing, there are probably two forces. One is the force plus Peter is increasing, so there's motivation to use Peter, and maybe there are less reasons to use other names. And before and after, you have maybe less reason to use Peter. Probably the name Peter didn't exist at the time. Whatever. If we go back 3,000 years, maybe the name Peter didn't exist because it is based on Jesus calling one of his followers Petros, which means rock, and said, you are the rock on which I built my church, and I call you Petros, and this is Peter. So 3,000 years there was no name Peter. So no reason to call someone Peter. And there have been other names around. And of course, there will be a time when nobody will be called Peter anymore. We have to look at the reasons why that and what are the new names coming up. What is important here to know is that usually we just look at this area and we try to understand, but we should try to get much more of this. Eventually, it means to go back 10 or 100 or 1,000 years. So here I wrote minus and plus, minus and plus. So what are these minus and plus? So there's an H missing, changes through time. So types of forces. So what are these kind of plus and minus forces? I mentioned three: generation, geohistorical fault lines, and extinction. So geohistorical fault lines, that is usually something important happens in a certain area. So, of course, something very important was 1st of January 1912, the Republic of China was proclaimed. This was important for China, but this was also very important for Chinese people living outside of China, be it in the United States or in Thailand or in Malaysia. Before this fault line, we don't find Minguo on a tombstone. But after 1912, we find Minguo, Republic of China, written on tombstones. In Singapore, it is very shocking. It is very shocking that is already after 1 or 2 years of Minguo, so in 1913, 14, 15, we already see the appearance of Republic of China on the tombstone. Here we see a little bit our curve. Actually, I don't know how it is, and it might be different for each country, for its region. And of course, there is a drop off. So in Thailand and in China, of course, the use of Mingo is decreasing, and especially after 1949, after the proclamation of the People's Republic of China. In Taiwan, however, the situation is different, so Mingo is still used there very actively. So if we look at these tombstones inscriptions, we have to understand the big lines. And doing research on Taiwan, there are these big lines. So just look at one thing. So this is Jinmen. Jinmen is actually an archipelago, 2 main islands, which is very close to Xiamen, which now is part of the Republic of China, which is also called Taiwan, and which is very much debated. But it shares the same culture only since 1949. The rest of the history was completely different. So in Jinmen, there have been no indigenous people. Jinmen has not been occupied by the Japanese. So if you want to understand, for example, the tombstones in Jinmen, you have to kind of divide the tombstones in before 1949 and after 1949. The same are other lines. So this is the Kushinga area. So this is where Chinese people have been until 1683. And this is the line which has never been under Chinese occupation. And it took the Japanese until 1906 to conquer this area. So this has been indigenous until 1906, and then it has been Japanese until 1945. So if you're in this area, you would have to look at the time before 1906 and after 1906. How to get these fault lines? Oh, it's too small to read. But anyway, it is. Here we do research on it's an island in the north of Okinawa, and we try to find these fault lines. And we just do it by recording historical facts. We read Wikipedia on that island and other articles, and we mark things. And then you see that something like 1600, there was a lot of going on, and then almost nothing, so nothing happens, and then there is, again, a period. So these periods with a lot of things going on are eventually fault lines. And there are fault lines not only in time, but in space. So this is one island, and it's different from the fault lines of another island. So you have to look at these lines in these places. So, and now we come to the communist tombs again. So the 4 communist tombs. So here we have Mingo Sanshi-san, 1944. Here we have Mingo Sanshi-wu, 1946. And this is not, you see the angle. This is not a communist. This is the shoemaker. The shoemaker, interestingly, has also Mingo and Sanshi-liu. And this is the communist tomb, the first communist tombs we have seen at the very beginning, Sanshi-liu. So 39, it is 1947. That is, we have these 4 occurrences. Thomas, I say Thomas took the photos. It's not me, I'm not. So there are between 44 and 47. What is interesting? The shoemaker which has the king, the seal of the king at the top, refers to the Chinese Republic. Kind of contradiction, maybe, I don't know. The communist, and I told you, we have to be very gentle to understand what was communism for them, right? We cannot say, oh, they were in favor of the Chinese Communist Party or whatever. So also 中华民国 referring to the Republic of China. So for this person or all these 1, 2, 3 communists, there was no contradiction between 中华民国, the Republic of China, and the idea of being communist. So we could now continue with our interpretation. But probably they saw that communist ideas could be realized within the Chinese Republic. Now we come to a second type of force. This is not the fault line, but the generation. This is a little bit harder to understand at my drawing. So let's say here again 1912. The People's Republic, no, 中华民国, the Republic of China. And the lines are now the life of people. Here's the birth, and here's the death, and the dot means the right Minguo. And here I have other people, and they don't write Minguo. So the idea of the generation claims that people who are born at the same time, and which more or less, when the Republic of China was founded in 1912, were at the age of, let's say, between 20 and 30, kind of very starting to get politically active, and these ideas are so important, right? They keep on with this idea in their mind no matter when they die. So it's not that before 45 they would not write it, or after 49 they would not write it. It is they are born in this time, something happens when they are 20 or 30 in that time, and this is such an important event for them that they carry it all over. Maybe you if you think of yourself, you have something of when you were 20 or 25, which was very important for you, something like music or so, which you will keep through all your life. So, for example, for me, it is the music of the Beatles, although I was too young. But the music that came later on, it was for me not important at all. It was just a copy, or not even as good as, so it was just the Beatles, right? And I will carry on with the Beatles through all my life. While people who were born before, they are maybe fans of Elvis Presley, and people later on, they may be Rolling Stones and ABBA and they carry it through their life. So, and as you can imagine, this can be tested relatively easily. So, if we look at the people who have Minguo on their tombstone, it is not, and this is kind of hypothesis, right? They're not scattered about one point because people die at a different age, but they're kind of born at the same time. So there is a kind of generation of people who would promote that idea. And other people, although they die after the Chinese Republic has been proclaimed, which are older, probably they have been born deep in the Qing dynasty period or whatever, and the time the Chinese Republic was founded, they're already 50 or 60 or 70. They don't care anymore, right? They are no longer politically active or so heart under fire or whatever. And of course, people later on, they have other interests. Maybe they're more in business and less in politics or so. So this is the second time of force, that is generation. And I go back here. This would be an interesting claim. We would have to, let's imagine that these guys all died at the age of 60. We don't know. We could check. But because these dates are all very similar, 44 to 47, and if they all die at the age of 60 or 65 or 70, they are all born at the same time. So this might eventually, with more data, explain this occurrence of Mingur on these tombstones. That is, we might calculate back if let's say in 1950 they were 70 years old, more or less the time the Chinese Republic was founded, they were 30, and they were maybe sensitive to these issues and were enthusiastic about getting rid of the emperor and having a republic. This was something important to them. So it would need more data, much more data, and it would need the date of birth of some of these so that we could look at whether it is actually the generation which is important, which makes people write 中华民国 or 民国 on the tombstone. And finally, something which always is the case, that is the extinction, the death of an agent. So let's think again of 1912. And here we have people who have been living in that area period, and they write Mingur on their tombstone, right? But their offspring, son or daughter, is no longer interested in that. So as long as this generation lives, it is used, but the next generation no longer is interested into that question. So this is a reason why certain cultural features disappear, simply by the fact that those people who like it or practices, like me, like to listen to the Beatles, once I'm dead, there are less people to listen to the Beatles. Right? And there are less and less people listening to Elvis because, well, you have to be 80 or something to like Elvis. So these are three different possible factors which describe this. So if a cultural feature dies, might be because people using this feature die. And here we have seen two kind of competing hypotheses, but which we can actually distinguish most of the time. One is a feature rises because something important happens, or because people who practice this have the same age. So this extinction, it sounds very brutal, but it's something people usually agree on. So there is the German physicist Max Planck, who in his memoirs wrote, "Science advances one funeral at a time." This means you are a student and you have a professor, and you don't agree with your professor, you can argue for many years. It doesn't help. The only thing that helps is that the professor dies. I mean, help. So usually you have the new ideas, the better ideas, and your students would listen to you and would say, oh, the old professor, but still the old professor would continue to write papers and write books. But it is usually that the death will finish that idea. And a similar idea has been expressed by Thomas Kuhn in, I think it's the second edition of the preface, which then is at the end of the book. And he also mentioned that people discuss these different paradigms and different ideas, and it finishes when the dies. So we still have 2 steps to go. I'm very demanding. What I want to convince you of is that our cultures are related to randomness or avoidance of randomness. And the first step is I try to convince you that although the world around us seems to be messy, it is not messy at all. So I talked a bit about this with a friend, and she sails a boat, and then she says, oh, the wind on a lake when I'm sailing is random, coming suddenly from the other side and then from that side. But I said, well, that's not random, right? It is just the left or the right side. And the wind is maybe, the temperature is maybe 20 degrees. It's not suddenly the wind has 3,000 degrees or 50,000 degrees or something. So all the randomness has limits. So, and I looked it up. I don't know whether it's true. I Googled and I found the longest drought is 14 years. Maybe that's for the United States. I can imagine that in some desert there might be a drought of 50 years or 60 years or a few hundred years. But there is no drought of 3,000 years. So speed. There is no endless speed. So the maximal speed is the speed of light, which is 300,000 kilometers per second. But we don't move at that speed. Also, no. The maximal speed, if we jump out of an airplane, is 200 kilometers, not faster. Cold, also, it cannot be illimitedly cold. The maximal cold is 273 degrees Celsius. But even that on the Earth, the maximal measured cold is minus 89, which is far away from 273. Then I looked at maximal wind speed. So some people guess, nobody knows what is the maximal theoretically speed of wind, because wind can also not be unlimited because there's friction, right? And the friction would then stop the wind again. And people guess, well, maybe 1,200 kilometers per hour. But the maximal measured wind speed is 400. Why is that important? So now come my drawing again. So I would say, oh, no, that is a mistake. The world we see is an expression of limits of randomness. So, for example, we look at a tree. Go into your garden or in a park and you look at a tree. Any tree is good. This tree is the expression of the limits of randomness. So, if we look at heat or cold, I don't know about the coldest temperature in Bangkok. 5 degrees? No. No. But definitely there is no minus 89 degree in Bangkok, and there is no 273. So this tree is protected by kind of, what is the coldest temperature? 10 degrees? Yeah.
Say 17, 18.
17, 18, okay. So the tree is protected. Then wind speed. There's no 1,200 kilometers per hour wind speed in Bangkok. That's also not 408, and maybe not 100. Even if the typhoon comes, because there are so many houses and they'll all block the wind. So this tree is protected by these limits of randomness, and below it's not visible. It is the drought. Maybe a tree can survive half a year without water, or maybe a year without water. But if you have 10 years without water, the tree would die. So if you see a tree, you know, and according to the tree, what was the lowest temperature and what was the strongest wind and what was the longest drought. So everything we see is an expression of these limits of randomness. And actually things are not random, although we think of them. In addition, whatever we do, we influence this randomness. Imagine again here a tree, and everything we do in culture, we kind of limit this randomness. For example, if we build a house, the wind gets slower. If we grow another tree, also that would block the wind for this. Or we do some water management, we can overcome the drought, etc. So a lot of these cultural activities, including tombs, and I will have to show, are there to limit randomness. So cultures fight entropy, cultures fight a mess. And we start already from something very organized, even if we think it's a mess, but it's still very organized. And we always try to increase this degree of organization, just to avoid randomness, to have our trees grow, to have our children grow, to have our flowers grow, to have water, etc. We don't want water to be dispersed everywhere. We don't want to have all kind of wind speeds. No, we just want to limit the wind. We want to limit the drought. And this comes to the last and the final claim that culture is about the implementation of resilience. So if we say resilience is the chance of survival or making survival possible, then cultures try to do everything to make our survival possible, to the survival of these people. And we have two things we have to distinguish. That is the social practice and the resilience function. The social practice is what we do and what we think we are doing, what we tell we are doing, for example, watering plants. Grandmother, what are you doing? I go into the garden, I water the plants. Resilience function is how this helps to survive. Of course, we could say that watering plants helps to survive by watering plants. But usually it's more. So watering plants, it might be for the beauty, the roses of grandmother, but grandmother might also have carrots and we need them to eat. So we want to have food production. Or we water the plants so the plants can grow and we avoid the soil erosion. So as long as there are plants on the ground, we don't have erosion. Or we water the plants, meaning we add water to the plant, and as all ground gets more and more salty, we wash out the salt of the ground. And now you see the difference. I would ask, grandmother, what are you doing? Where are you going? And grandmother would say, I'm watering the plants. She would not say, I'm fighting the salination of the soil, right? She does it, but she doesn't know. And grandmother would not say, I reduce entropy. Entropy is water is everywhere. We don't put water in every possible place, but we collect water in one specific place and put it into another very specific place. So the same for gardening. Gardening, a lot of anthropologists wrote about gardening and how it's important. It's very similar, right? It's about food, soil erosion, salination, but also gardening is important for physical health. So if your father or grandfather works in a garden, or mother, they're usually more active, more healthy. In addition, they monitor the environment. They are outside all the time. They see when a storm is coming, when it's rain, when you have to protect your cattle, etc. In addition, they have a topic to talk about. They talk with the neighbor about gardening. And talking to each other is something which is also called social capital. Like they interact, they build a community, and as a community, they can help each other. In addition, if you do gardening, you breed local varieties. That is, you have carrots which grow in this ground with this degree of salination much better than in another area or other plants you might import. So I might continue. I don't continue that far, but if we look at festivals, ceremonies, and for example, chiming is such a ceremony, which is social practice, and we might look at the resilience functions. That is basically a social exchange. So what I've seen is families coming together, large families coming together. They organized it very well. Different families bought different stuff. They came together at the same time. They collaborated. Cooperated. They know each other's strength and weakness. They know who has a big car and who has a small car, who can carry what, who likes to buy what. They maintain a friendly relation, which is very, very important to have friendly relation with your neighbors or family, because if you have friendly relation and you need their help, you're more easy to call them and say, oh, I have a problem. Can you come over to help me? If you have enemies only, you don't call them, so you don't help each other. So you create a group spirit and you have the group support. So chiming is a kind of, whatever it is, it has many, many functions, many resilience functions, but among them is this group spirit, working together, providing together, preparing together, experiencing together, and creating this group spirit, which in case of need provides a group which will help you. And of course, we can think of it in terms of entropy. This is usually the most vague one, but if we have nothing to say, we can even say that. For example, time. For example, why do we have a temple festival? It is there to avoid that everyone goes every time to the temple, randomly. So I want to come to your office and you're not there because you're at the temple. And then I go to another person and I'll say, oh, no, today we went to the temple. No. In Europe or in America, you go to the temple on Sunday. Then from Monday to Friday or Sunday to Saturday they're in the office. So you can work. If everybody could at every time go to the temple or to church to pray, this would be a big mess. And also space, right? On Sunday, people don't go to work and all drive to the church. It's regulated. If at any time everybody would go from home to work, to church, to temple, would be kind of traffic mess. So again, the entropy is the most general resilience function, but it is one of many, many resilience functions. So, and now we are at the peak. So resilience is the most general explanation of culture. And now we have to go back step by step by step to go back to the tombs and to understand the tombs. Here we go back. So I go back from resilience to the general idea of fighting entropy, and it's maybe clear that fighting entropy supports survival, and that all culture products we see are the result of reduced entropy and the attempt to survive. That is, we have done everything to reduce the wind and to provide water, etc. So here we come to a first problem, and we have to come up with a reason why it would help the next generation to be different from the previous generation. Why would that help in their survival? I don't know whether you have an idea. So why is it important for my son to like a different music than I like?
Is it important?
Yeah, I think it is. So to show that actually resilience and the reduction of entropy is in all these, and at the end of tombs, we probably would have to find, this is the intellectual task, to find the advantage of having of ending the tradition of your father and your mother when you build your own traditions. I think this is maybe not so difficult if we assume that the world is changing. Economy is changing, environment is changing, social structures are changing, technology is changing, science is changing. So everything changes. And it would be, if you would just stick with the practices, the traditions of your father and mother, or your grandparents, you would be kind of
Not advancing.
Yeah, not advancing. You would be outdated. Probably we would be we would select it, and we would not. So if you would run around with the same clothes as your grandparents, you could not do a lot of jobs. They would say to you, "Oh, don't come back." And if we come to something like listening to music, of course, my son, if this is my son, likes to listen to the music of this beautiful girl, right? So if there's a girl and she likes a certain music, my son probably would like the same music just because this is good for his reproduction.
Okay.
And if he would listen to the same music as I would listen, then this beautiful lady would say, "Oh, boy, you're a little bit out of fashion." So there is maybe some evolutionary advantage in it. So why would this generation issue be of evolutionary advantage? Also, we can see this is probably also a support group. It is not a group which is a family group, but it might be something like a school class, people going to school at the same time, at the same period, having the same experience. And so I remember my father, for example, my father grew up in the middle of the Second World War. He was a child of the Second World War. And he has some of these friends who grew up with him in that time. And this is a kind of group of people which continue to support each other. So whenever there was a problem, then he said, oh, go to this guy and say, you are the son of Franz, and they will help you. And so, of course, we would have to think more about it, but there might be a kind of evolutionary advantage in this. And I go further back. The fault lines. So let's go back again here. Maybe that's the least controversial one. So going back, so before 1949, the story of Jinmen was very much the same as the story of Shaman. After 1949, actually the line should go somewhere between whoever is Jinmen here. Yeah. So after 1949, the history of Jinmen and Shaman was different. So Jinmen was then part of the Republic of China of Taiwan, and Shaman was part of the People's Republic of China. So, and you see that on the tombstones. Why would you see that? Because people here were in this political system. They were supposed to survive. So on this side, you were not supposed to continue to write Minguo on your tombstones. And on this side, you were not supposed to write Zhonghua Ren Bing Gong He Guo on your. So you could not write in China that Republic of China, or in Taiwan, you could not continue to write the People's Republic of China, because that would have had consequences. So you would have to adapt to a kind of political pressure, military pressure, etc. I've done a lot of research on Penghu, these islands here, and how they changed in 1895 when the Japanese conquered these islands. Also, the tradition changed because people were just forced into that. So we see these fault lines, which are kind of very theoretical lines we can draw on a map, reading some documents, but for people they were shocking events. Suddenly they were at one side of the border, and there was a kind of conflict, whatever conflict, and they found themselves on one side of the conflict, and they had to survive in the system where they had been, either on this side or that side or that side. So these are these borders, and I mean, this is probably a curve which epitomizes, which contains evolution as such. That is, there are some changes in some factors, and a system evolves, change in some certain ways. And well, even if you look at animals, it might be millions of years, but then eventually traditions or genes or whatever changes. So there are a few animals which are around since so many years. There are like the crocodiles, or which are almost unchanged, but all other animals changed. And for example, if you want to understand mammals, and we are mammals, we have to understand the origin of mammals. So when mammals arise, so this is the plus Peter. The plus other were the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs were the strong, and they lived at daylight. So therefore, the mammals had to do their business, whatever it was, at night. So therefore, our smell and our ears, our eyes, no, our nose and our ears can be very good. Like if you think of the nose of a dog or the ear of a dog, our vision is not necessarily that good because we come from this time. However, the eagle, which is a bird, which is a kind of dinosaur, which the eagle comes from this time a day, it's a day animal still living here, has a very strong vision. So we don't have the eye of an eagle. So just to say that this curve is maybe everywhere in all kind of transformation, and especially in cultural transformation, and it's the nature of this evolution. The top-down propagation. This is, as I said, the result of a structural force. It might be media or the government imposing something and something springing up because we're under this force. I have to speed up a little bit. Nostalgia is also something to keep a group together, right? As I mentioned before. So probably people migrated by force or for whatever reason into another place, and they're exposed to a lot of cultural influences. But to keep this group together and not this group to mix up easily with the new neighbors, they have to be more strict about the definition of their culture than it has been originally. So therefore, the Germans in Taiwan are more German than the Germans, just to keep this German group alive. Migration, saying, okay, they stick to the rules. Also, this is, if you migrate from one place to another, you are under a lot of stress. But imagine there is a group of Muslims or whatever, let's say a group of Muslims, and they migrate into another group. And suddenly the women would say, husband, I don't cook anymore. That is, the group would be under a new pressure and would have new problems. So they reduce the problems they had just to the problems they have at their outside and try to maintain internal stability, to keep at least that in the same state. So if in addition, for example, the women would say, husband, I don't cook anymore, cook your own stuff, this migration group would have internal problems and external problems and probably would fall apart. So now we come to back to the tombs, and we have to understand tombs as a strategy to survive. This sounds a little bit contradictory because tomb is associated with dying, and I say that is a strategy to survive. But let's maybe go to here and say, oh, I pushed something. So let's say there is the Techo graveyard here, and there's a Hakka graveyard there, and so first, the fight entropy. They're not burying everywhere all over Bangkok. It's not that at every corner you see one tomb, but it's highly organized. Second, they gain visibility. That is, there's a big sign saying, this is the Hakka graveyard. That is, the group of the Hakka people has its own symbol, its own claim. They claim the land. They say, we as a group are here. And whatever decision is taken with respect to Chinese people who have migrated from China, so Hakka people will be taken into consideration because they have their claim here. In addition, as I tried to explain, Chiming is an occasion where families gather, they collaborate, and I don't know exactly the ownership of the Hakka or the Hokkien graveyard, but what you see with the Hainan graveyard, which is no longer there, they sold the ground. That is, they made millions. I mean, if in this area you can sell some ground, you're so rich you cannot imagine how rich you are. So they own the land and they claim the land and they have the right to use the land because there are the tombs. So thinking of these tombs and graveyards in terms of survival is not as absurd as it sounds at the beginning, but it's a way of a social group to survive in such a big city like Bangkok or in a big country like Thailand. So
you want to wrap it up?
Yeah, I would. So I just started, just to summarize in a few seconds, I started from the observations of a few tombs and the difficulties in understanding these tombs, saying, we need larger systems to understand. I called them semiotic system. We looked at the water system. And then I tried to get more and more abstract and saying, well, cultures essentially are all about survival, and one technique is reduction of entropy. And this has some effects on how cultures spread through time and space. But once we have done it and we kind of worked it out and we agreed upon it, we come back with a framework of analysis which would allow us to understand graveyards and tombstones. And then we might go back to each of the tombstones and look at them and say, so why does these tombstones eventually help with the survival of maybe this family? Not by its own, but by looking at this larger picture, economic, geographical, and survival.
Okay, thank you very much, Associate Professor Oliver Streiter. It's a very interesting talk. We have a few minutes if we have any questions. If any of you are here or online have any quick questions for Associate Professor Oliver. Or while waiting, or maybe you have some questions. It's my question from this very interesting talk. I see that you have done extensive research and fieldwork in different countries. And so, for example, with regards to countries in Southeast Asia, the US, Europe as well, we have, or different other parts of Asia apart from China, you have like this Hokkien, burial grounds. And I believe you said that nostalgia means that they bring back, the culture from China, and it became more concrete. Are these places, do they have similar nostalgia, like similar expression of what China is? Like they have similar trends of tombstones, for example, or decorations or writings? Are they similar from each other, in terms of the different regions that you have researched?
Do you mean the different Hokkien's graveyards all over the world?
Yeah.
That's a very difficult question. And the answer is yes and no, and it would be very interesting to look at the yes and the no. So, of course, all claim this link to this Hokkien region, and what they share maybe is this through place names, the place names they have, using place names of the region. But all the rest might vary and depend very much on the local context. So, for example, in Taiwan, which most people claim to be from the Hokkien region, so most tombs have an incense burner, something like we see here. We see here kind of within the tomb, a place where you can put the incense stick to burn. There's no tomb without an incense burner in Taiwan. In these graveyards, a lot of tombs don't have an incense burner. But what people do is they bring some fruit, cut it open, put the fruit on the ground, and stick the incense there. And I observed that, and this is what they do in the Hokkien graveyard, but it's all what they do in the Hakka graveyard. It's also what they do in the Cantonese graveyard, and it's also what they do in the Chaozhou graveyard. And probably it's also something Thai people do if they go to a Thai temple. So you see there is a kind of influence from more local culture. The Hakka graves are very similar. They are kind of like this, but it has nothing to do, really nothing, with the Hakka we find in China or the Hakka we find in Taiwan. They are homogeneous, similar among themselves in Bangkok, but it's different from other Hakka places. And the Hokkien graveyard, that is surprising, the Hokkien graveyard is very different from the Hakka graveyard in the sense there is very little order. So where the Hokkien tombs are, one is similar to the next, with the Hokkien, it's creativity poor. So everybody can do what he or she wants. They have a roof or no roof. They have some Thai elements integrated, or like a Roman emperor, a tomb like a Roman emperor. So you find all kind of stuff. So the answer is that there is this kind of imagined link to Hokkien, and of course some features are carried over, but then you have a lot of imagination and a lot of influence from cultures which are around. Yeah.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. I think we don't have any other questions. So for today, I would like to say thank you to Associate Professor Streiter again for giving us this very interesting talk, and also for your presence here today, and for your visiting scholarship here in PBIC. Thank you very much. Okay, so I would like to end the session, and then so we'll end the live right now. Thank you very much.